Greetings all, welcome to another episode of Pen and Paint, the channel where I merge my love of miniature painting with my growing passion for writing. This is the second episode in Da March to War, the first story arc of the series A Red Harvest. If you haven't watched the first episode or the primer video yet, don't worry, all episodes can be viewed in isolation. Previous episodes will, however, provide some useful narrative context. If you enjoy this tale, I recommend watching the other videos, links to which can be found in the video description below. In this episode, we'll be painting a mighty Rockgut Troggoth. Due to the size of the model and number of painting hours required to complete it, I'll not be painting everything on camera. For each type of material, I'll paint a representative section to completion, do the rest off camera, and display the finished material in its entirety before moving on to the next. There are 3 parts which I'll not be painting here: the dangling grot, the Troggoth's loincloth, and the clam fungus gribbly on the base. Tutorials for the first 2 were provided in the previous video of this series, a pokey stick, and the recipe for the third will be released as a short tutorial in the next few months. A complete list of all paints used for each material is on screen now. Paints will also be noted as they're used. Video timestamps are available for each step of the painting process. If you'd like to read today's story or listen to it without the video, links to pure text and audio versions are in the video description below. Feel free to mute the video if you're only here for the painting. Today's story is A Mighty Big Club, wherein we join a hungry troll on a gastronomical adventure. This story is rated E for everyone. For any other species, the find would have been overtly suspicious. Comically so, even. The equivalent of wandering the open countryside far from any village or homestead and finding on one's path a well-trimmed, perfectly seasoned roast still steaming on a great platter, resting on a stool under the shady boughs of a picturesque hazel or oak beside a pint of ale accompanied by a large sign that read, in an elegant hand, "You are hungry and weary, eat meat and rest." Trolls, however, were, for better or worse, incapable of suspicion. The capacity to suspect is contingent on the capacity to hold multiple notions, often in conflict with each other, at once. A troll's head, while admittedly very large, was almost entirely given over to a notoriously resilient hide and an extraordinarily thick skull. Its brain was no larger than a hefty peach, and nearly as smooth. So it was that when Thort discovered a moderately sized pile of inviting, mouth-watering, orange-speckled stones perfectly stacked smack in the middle of a curiously clean and tidy patch of cave floor along the course it was traveling, the long-armed behemoth of muscle and foul hygiene was only too happy at its astounding luck. The stone troll had been wandering this particular region of deep dank for an age without finding anything more than the odd chip of quartz. Thort dined with the enthusiasm and indelicacy of its people. No sooner had its ravenous appetite shown signs of abating, though, than the heap of flinty morsels was consumed down to the last pebble. Oi! Sadness. But what was this? Peering down the way to its right, Thort's poor eyes caught a glinting reflection along the path. It lumbered over and discovered another orange-speckled stone. The troll popped it into its mouth with a satisfying crunch and was about to turn back when, could it be? It sighted another one further down the trail. Oi! Delight. And on it went, delicious craggy nugget after delicious craggy nugget, leading Thort ever onwards. Thort was still for a considerable span of time. The torches, few as they were a few too many. They hurt its eyes as it squinted at the lumpen figure. Intent on the seemingly endless train of food, Thort hadn't realized it had stumbled into a large chamber, full of light and noise. The thing before Thort was big, just about as big as Thort itself was. Pink as well, also like Thort was. There were crusty, rocky bits all over its body and arms. Thort raised its hands. There were crusty, rocky bits on them too. Big, pink, yellow. Oh. Understanding. The stone troll lumbered over. It stopped behind the familiar, gangle-armed creature. Hefting its great crude club out to the side, Thort swung it violently at the creature's head. There was an almighty crack of stone striking stone. The seated figure wobbled to the side. Turning its head about in a slow, aimless motion, its gaze eventually found the misshapen face of Thort. The two stared at each other for a drawn-out moment.
Oi!
Recognition. The other troll grinned something hideous and tooth-filled up at Thort.
Hello!
Said Trude.
Hello!
Replied Thort. Trude was sat on a great mass of white stone, carved in the visage of some hideous monster. The troll was munching away on small chunks of stone similar to the orange ones Thort had come across. Before the latter could ask if there were any to share, a frail, scampery, bitty little green thing no taller than Thort's belly button came waddling out of the painful lights. Pointy-eared and laden with great chips of purple-veined ore, shaking and shivering under the load, it approached the troll and dropped its burden at Thort's feet. Raising its cumbersome brows with appreciation, Thort lifted the club again, bringing it down with an almighty crump on the strange green creature. With a chirrup, the figure dove out of the way and the club buried itself into the ground instead of its body. Thort stared at the spot.
Oi!
Disappointment.
They does that.
Trude said slowly between rocky chews.
They does?
Thort asked.
Mm-hmm. How's I supposed to says hello then?
The seated troll shrugged.
Dunno's. Jay's too squishy to greets, I thinks.
Thort considered the idea at length.
I thinks you right. They look squishy.
Then, struck by a bolt of pure inspiration, Thort wondered aloud.
Oi, if we can't crumps them to says hello, then how's we supposed to says thank yous for the food?
This was an excellent question. Trolls, with the brutal simplicity that characterized the entirety of their existence, expressed their gratitude in the same blunt manner as they made their greetings. If a wallop worked well enough to say, "Good morning," then it was equally up to the task to say, "Thank you for a delicious meal." In fact, a solid knocking about was a useful way of communicating a broad range of courtesies. Trolls were nothing if not efficient in their sentiments. Trude's munching slowed to a gradual stop.
I thinks,
it said, the tiny gears in its tiny brain spinning at a blistering speed.
I thinks we says thanks for the foods.
Were.
By eating the foods.
The monumental effort required to arrive at such a reasoned conclusion in so short a span of time was obviously too much for the troll to handle. It squeezed its eyes shut and grasped the side of its head with a gnarly free hand.
Oh!
Thort looked down at the pile of rocks the two squishy green-skinned thing had dropped at its feet. Eat the food to say thank you for the food. What an inspired idea! Without comment, the troll sat down with a heavy thump and gingerly picked up one of the delicious-looking rocks, popping it into its mouth. The purple ones were his favorite. Now, an armful of rocks isn't much of a meal, especially when it's weedy goblin arms that are the measure. More like a palmful of berries, fresh picked from a bush. Something to whet the appetite than to satiate it. So it was that Thort managed to get 2 or 3 good crunches before discovering that it was not only out of tasty morsels, but that it was also ravenously hungry, despite the sizable appetizer it had enjoyed not too long before. But even as the germ of the idea to go find a proper troll-sized meal began to form in its mind, the issue resolved itself. Another goblin tottered into view, carrying an armful of rocks, this time with flecks of blue in them.
Oi!
Delight. Its club still in one mighty hand, Thort started to raise it, hesitated, then put it back down. The porter, until that moment quivering violently, deflated like a hopper being sat on. It dropped its bundle and bent forward so low that its head touched the ground before turning and running off, disappearing into the searing halo of torches. What odd little creatures! Thort turned to Trude to tell him the remarkable behavior just witnessed. It discovered it needn't make the effort. Just as Trude picked up the last of its own little pile, a goblin arrived with a restock, bending forward in the same strange manner before running off.
Oh.
Wonderment. In this manner did time pass. Over the course of what could reasonably be called an afternoon, Thort sat in a state of quiet bliss, munching on a seemingly endless supply of scrumptious morsels, in idle contemplation of the strangeness of the situation. It watched with amusement as each green-skinned goblin wobbled out of the areas of brightness, unloaded its burden, bent over, and scampered back. The torches, while still uncomfortably bright, no longer hurt Thort's eyes. It could now see that there were a great many other of the little creatures bounding about in the distances, moving hither and thither with rapid, jerky motions. Some carried shiny bits, others long pokey bits. A few carried great big poles. Some of these sported colorful flappy bits hanging from them and were being waved back and forth, while at least one had a large flat shiny bit that was being smashed over and over again with a stick. The sound was not unpleasant to Thort, adding to its enjoyment of the bizarre happenings rather than detracting from it. Looking at the most recent rocky offerings, it noticed that there were no new colors in the stones, but that they were instead mixtures of old ones.
Oi.
Curiosity. Thort picked up both a yellow rock and a blue one, and stuffed both into its mouth at the same time. The mixture was delicious.
The green ones is best.
Thort blinked about at the unfamiliar voice.
What's that?
Trude stuck out an arm, gesturing to a space past it. Thort scrooched forward a few feet to see beyond its new friend. The motion threw the goblins about it into a screeching frenzy, settling only when Thort did the same. It spied a third troll.
Oi.
Surprise,
Hello.
said Tunk.
Hello.
Said Thort. Then
What's you say?
Tunk tried to remember what it had said.
Oh. The green ones is best.
It waggled the stone for emphasis before eating it.
Green ones, eh? Yes'm. Special green ones. Bright and glowing. Bright and glowy, you say? Yes'm. They crunch nice and tickles. Crunch and tickles? Yes'm. I've never had a tickly one before. They special. I've only found them once. Very special.
Thort slowed his eating. Green ones, eh?
Oi.
Desire. Thort reached out with surprising swiftness and grabbed at the goblin that had just dropped another snack. The goblin, lulled into a sense of complacency at the troll's placid behavior, realized too late its peril. It tried to dive out of Thort's grasp, but the massive creature caught hold of one of its legs. Petrified with fright, the unlucky goblin could only stare wide-eyed as the troll slowly rose to its feet. Thort lifted the creature before its face.
You's got green ones.
What passed for a casual inquiry for a troll was little more than a monstrous, ferocious growl to a goblin. The unlucky greenskin began wailing and babbling incoherently, flailing its limbs about. Try as it might, Thort couldn't make heads or tails of the answer.
Green ones.
It said, slower this time. Yet the response was the same.
Maybes.
Suggested Tunk from across the hall.
It doesn't know what a green one is. They's very special.
What a brilliant bit of insight. Of course they wouldn't know what a green one was. Thort didn't know what they were, and it had eaten a whole lot of rocks in its time. But if Thort wasn't sure what they looked like, how could this little thing know either? It was quite the conundrum. Thort pondered the problem at great length, still standing and holding the goblin in front of its face. Its eyes shifted between the creature before it and the small assortment of rocks by its feet, back and forth from the colorful rocks to green-skinned creature. Green rocks. Green rocks. Green...
Oi!
An idea. The poor goblin, having been dangling upside down for some time, had ceased struggling and was on the verge of passing out. It was brought to by a rough poke at his leg by the scraggly, dirty nail of a gargantuan finger.
Green
Thort uttered the word as clearly as it could. It pointed at the pile.
rocks.
The goblin just blinked. Thort tried again.
Green.
It said very slowly, this time patting the skin of the goblin's leg as gently as it could, before pointing at the rocks.
Rocks. Green rocks. You have some?
Nothing. Thort sighed, releasing the goblin, who shrieked a short distance to the ground. It was no use. The creatures were not only too squishy, but also apparently too stupid to understand the simplest of concepts. What little imagination Thort had was piqued, however, and the thought of a tickly green snack had fully consumed its small brain. If these creatures didn't have any, Thort would have to go a-looking for itself. With a mighty stretch that sent a convulsive wave through the assembly of goblins, Thort made ready to say goodbye to its new friends in the usual manner. To Thort's surprise, the others also climbed to their feet.
Ray's coming with,
Said Trude, tucking under its arm the massive white boulder it used as a chair.
Oi!
Added Tunk, lifting a mighty big club with a pretty purple smackin' end.
I wants to find some tickly specials too.
Oi! Delight. Unobserved by the trio of lumbering monstrosities, the rabble of goblins had fallen further back from where the trolls now stood. The previously shrieking mob had grown quiet. As the trolls prepared to leave, 4 goblins moved from beyond the torch line. 3 of them sidled forward, each clutching a large leather bag in their hands. A yellow crescent was daubed onto the front of the sackcloth they wore. The 4th goblin stood at their center. It was the shiniest goblin Thort had seen yet. The shiny one stuck out its arms and cried out in a powerful, for its size, voice. As one, the other 3 goblins opened their bags. From each was pulled a single, large, glassy stone. Stones which shimmered and glowed a beautiful, sickly green.
Oh,
Wonderment.
is that them?
Trude whispered.
That's them.
Tunk confirmed.
Them's the special ones.
The goblins shuffled forward, one to each troll, lifting the rocks up on quaking arms. Wary of their squishiness, the trolls picked up the offerings as gingerly as they could. Thort studied the shimmering mineral. The light emanating from it seemed almost a pulse. It touched it to its tongue.
Oi!
Tangy. With each slow, deliberate chew, the shards of weird stone shot forth a shower of tiny bolts of malign lightning, each potent enough in its own right to explode the head of a goblin. The durability of a troll, however, was far beyond that of most beings. Their insides were nearly as durable as their outsides. The lining of a troll's mouth was tougher than boiled leather, their tongue as coarse as a rasp. The darts of blistering magic barely scorched the skin, strong enough to be felt, but too weak to do any harm. For Thort, the experience was transcendental.
It tickles going down.
Thort exulted, wide-eyed. Even as the last tiny fragments dissolved in the stone troll's heavy stomach acids, they threw off sparks of delight. Thort looked down at the creature before it.
You's got another one.
The goblin shook its bag upside down. A pinch of sparkly dust fluttered out.
Oh,
Disappointment. The shiny goblin waved its arms about, catching Thort's attention. It waggled a stick with a great curved pokey end, gesturing to the distant reaches of the cave while it squawked words in a curiously familiar tongue. It repeated them over and over, pointing with the pokey stick. Thort screwed up its face in concentration, trying to understand. It could almost make out the words. The shiny goblin moved forward to the end of the cave, taking a few steps forward before turning around and repeating the words and gestures.
Green,
said Trude slowly.
I think she's saying green. Boy.
Understanding.
I think she's saying there's more green specials that way.
The other trolls looked at Thort in awe.
Yes'm,
It said with resolution.
that's it. He's not saying it right, but he's saying it still. There's more tingly specials down there.
To confirm his hypothesis, Thort pointed at the bag still held inverted, then towards the far end of the cave. The shiny goblin jumped and scampered in place.
Says, Oi, I think you's right.
Exclaimed Tunk with enthusiasm.
And I thinks they wants us to follows them to it.
Trude nodded in agreement.
Me too's. Alright, yous twos, let's go find us some specials.
The trolls hesitated, though. They may have been invited to a feast beyond imaginings, but they couldn't leave quite yet. There were certain niceties that had to be observed first. Unfortunately, the normal conventions were infeasible. The two friends shuffled in place, eyeing Thort to figure out a solution to their problem. Fortunately, the troll had been watching the goblins for much of the day while it ate, and a solution wasn't long in presenting itself. In an awkward, halting motion, Thort bent stiffly at the waist, bringing its face within inches of the goblin before him. The porter, under strict orders to not run away lest he be fed to a hopper, was rooted to the spot. To his relief and awe, the troll didn't eat him. Instead, it held the pose for a moment before straightening back up.
What'd you do that for?
Asked Tunk.
I thinks that's how they says thank yous. Makes sense.
Said Trude with a nod after some reflection.
They's too squishy for smacking after alls.
Trude and Tunk each mirrored the gesture Thort had made. The cavern burst in a spasm of shouts and cheers, and the shiny goblin, waving and leaping about, began his way to the rear of the cavern. The three trolls, grinning from ear to ragged ear, followed after, their thoughts full of the banquet they'd soon be feasting on. That was A Mighty Big Club, the second episode of Da March to War, inspired by the Rockgut Troggoth models in the Gloomspite Gitz Spearhead Bad Moon Mad Mob, produced by Games Workshop. I hope you enjoyed the tale. While this video series is focused on the Gloomspite Gitz Spearhead, the faction will be my primary AOS army. I'm planning on a full Rockgut-centric Trog herd. That's an entire army of these baby-skinned behemoths led by none other than Trug, the Troggoth King himself. If you'd like to see how to paint Moon Clan grots like the little fellow hanging upside down, please check out the previous episode, A Pokey Stick. The next story in the series is entitled A Face Full of Teeth. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback on anything you've seen in this episode, please comment below. That's it for today. See you next time.